Alright guys, I want to welcome you to a little short nerd rod video we're putting together. This is Terry's Stage 4 chassis going for his 55 two-door hardtop that his father actually bought new in 1955. So he's slapping it together but with some new goodies so he can really drive it in the modern day. So let's just run over a few things. I wanted to kind of go over some stuff for Terry and his guys who are going to be putting it together because this is a Stage 4, like I said, but it has some extras that he and his guys wanted added on. The Be Cool radiator system for one. But I also wanted to run over a handful of things for some of you other guys thinking about even down to a Stage 1, just some stuff to consider for when you're building your own TriFive utilizing a Nerd Rod's C4 chassis. So let me just start at the back and work my way around with some of the pointers and things that I wanted you guys to know. Alright, so for starters, this particular chassis, the Stage 4, comes with the GM LS3 Connect and Cruise package. The Connect and Cruise utilizes the LS3 Crate Motor and a 4L60 transmission rebuild. The 4L60 doesn't natively come behind an LS3. So instead of utilizing one computer for everything, they've got this special computer that just runs the transmission. A little bit different. We didn't hook it up on Terry's car, even though we fired it up and got it running, just because he wanted to run, it has to go through the car. And so to hook it all up, to take it off, pretty much kind of pointless. So the next thing I wanted to cover was the differentials. So on all of our Stage 3 and Stage 4 chassis, we do the either Dana 36, Dana 44, whatever specified. We go ahead and pop in the AMSOIL Severe Duty Gear Lube, but we also go ahead and use the AMSOIL Slip Lock for the limited slip. Now I wanted to cover this real fast because I see guys screwing this up a lot. The slip lock, or the posi additive as it's commonly known as, guys take it, they get the whole tube, they dump the entire thing into the differential. That's not how it works. The way it's supposed to work is you're supposed to add your differential oil, put that in, and then you add a little bit of the slip lock if the differential chatters when you go around a corner. A lot of the AMSOIL stuff doesn't, but it depends on what kind of clutches are in there. So what happens, you put a little bit of the slip lock into it and you drive the car in a circle. If you hear the rear end chatter, 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 you add a little bit more, you add a little bit more, you add a little bit more, a couple of squirts at a time, not dump the whole damn thing in there. If you take it and you put the entire thing of slip lock inside of a limited slip differential, you have essentially eliminated the whole purpose of having the limited slip differential, and the clutches won't grab at all. You won't have any grab, you won't have any of the similarity in it, and it'll just be like a regular open spider diff. So this one's kind of new for you guys. If you have worked on LS motor stuff before, traditionally you're used to seeing a 4L60, 4L80. It's got this shifter box on the side that goes up here on the side of the transmission. And what that essentially does is it controls the input-output for the positioning of the shifter. We saw that this one did not come with one, and we freaked out for a second. Until after we started going through the wiring harness, that apparently, because of the Supermatic transmission computer, it doesn't actually need this. So when you don't have one of these on your transmission, don't panic, it's not supposed to be there. Alright, so the next fun bit was the headers. Now these are the Melrose C4 conversion header. So this is actually a header to put an LS1 into a C4 Corvette. As you can also see, it works absolutely amazingly for putting an LS1 into a car with a C4 Corvette suspension, despite the fact that we moved the motor. The only problem we ran into was way up here is where the oxygen sensor is supposed to go in. As you can see, there's not exactly a whole lot of room for it to fit. So what we ended up having to do was move the oxygen sensor a little bit further back to make everything fit and clear and work properly. But as you can see, there's not a way to get an O2 sensor in here. It won't fit at all. So be ready to move that if you decide to go with a Melrose header. So the Nerd Rod Stage 4 comes with the Vintage Air Pulley system. Now the Vintage Air Pulley system comes with a late model GM power steering pump. On this particular setup for Terry's car, he went ahead and got the Be Cool complete radiator setup, and it comes with a front power steering reservoir. Unfortunately, as you can see, the fittings are so high on this, with them being higher than the power steering reservoir that's down here. By hooking it up, it would overflow the reservoir and cause it to puke all over the place. So unfortunately, we had to pass on running the power steering reservoir because it has a snap-on rear mount, just some kind of plug-in play. And so to avoid creating more headaches, we went ahead and just bypassed that on this particular setup. Something to kind of keep in mind if you're going to go ahead and spend the money on it. You definitely don't need it. One last thing with the power steering is we're running the AMSOIL power steering fluid, and so the extra power steering canister comes with it. That way if you bleed anything out, have any air bubbles, or you end up just needing to disconnect it to move things or clean things up, you'll have that to go ahead and top it off if necessary. So up here on the motor, the LS3 Connect and Cruise system comes with the generator plug on the wiring harness. It's specifically for the later model alternators that need an exciter to get the alternators kicked off. This particular one, the Vintage Air, has a one-wire alternator and it does not need it. We went ahead and left it on here so that way the final decision of the owner could be made to whether to cut it, tuck it, or do whatever. These two lines, power cables going into it, are for the temporary setup to get it to where it'll fire up and run. When the guys get it at the shop, these two wires need to come off. Now, this big thick one is a good solid quality power cable. Don't throw it away, but hold on to it. You might decide to use it for the fuse block, but for now, these are just for starting the engine and getting it fired up and applying temporary power to the fuse block. So one thing I wanted to cover were these aftermarket fuel pressure regulators. And this particular one's an Aeromotive. It's what comes standard with our fuel system. And what I wanted to do is cover you guys how the thing works. So if you decide to move it, install it elsewhere, you'll know how to hook it up. There's some different things you can do with one of these. So what happens is the fuel pressure comes in through this side, goes from this side to the fuel rail, but the extra is bled off through here and returned to the gas tank. So what you can do is if you want to flip it, you can literally flip this thing around and the fuel can come in this side and go out this side and it'll work just the same. Another thing that can be done is to take the fuel, go into your fuel rail if you've got one of the nice aftermarket fuel rails, and then split and come into both sides of this and then return, so the extra pressure will go back. There's several different ways you can do it, but when you get this to the car, if you decide that no, I don't want to put this on the firewall this way, I want to put it on the inner fender, you can simply disconnect, flip this around, flip it one way or another. Now, this is an adjustable pressure regulator, so when you get these, you can screw this up and down to change the pressure on the system. You will need to set it. This one is already set, but when you guys get one and you're firing it up for the first time, we don't set these here. You need to set it up and check it, because that can cause your car to not start. Also, for guys planning on supercharged turbo setups, these do have the boost reference on it, at which point it'll raise the fuel pressure 1 psi for every 1 psi of boost pressure. So if you guys are planning on running superchargers or turbos, our fuel system is ready to handle it. Now for Terry's car, the engine came with oil in it, but we had already gotten the AMSOIL because I had figured that the motor was going to be dry. The last couple of crate motors I've gotten involved in dry. So it's got oil in it. What I would say is run this for 200, 300, 400, 500 miles or until you get the car put together. Drain the oil and go ahead and put the AMSOIL in it. You've got a full round of that. Throw it in there, rock and roll. Now, since we had to rig this thing up temporarily, we used a temporary stub over on the the heater line. This will have to come off, obviously. So while the B-Cool came with the 2 gallons of B-Cool radiator coolant, we went ahead and got the AMSOIL coolant as well. We didn't know the B-Cool was going to come with it. So we went ahead and did that, filled it up with the AMSOIL since you're going to have to bleed it off anyway. That way you can go ahead and put in whatever coolant you feel like when you're done. You do have some AMSOIL left if you want to top this off, but you've also got the 2 gallons of B-Cool. Now, these are the braided steel lines for the power steering. I'm sorry, for the automatic transmission. If you see right now, they're kind of touching against the heater line. When your guys install it, they need to make sure that they route their heater lines so these lines are not touching the heater line. If they do, these are really rough, and the vibration of the motor will literally cause it to serrate and grind through the rubber hose. And we're not talking about in 5, 6, 7 years, we're talking about in a couple of 100 miles. It'll go through it like a hot knife through butter. So Terry decided to go ahead and go with the MSD high torque starter, and it's a beautiful piece, fits very nicely, clears the headers, but just barely. As you can see, it's really tight back in here. I can't even get my fingers between the starter and the header. Now the guys at MSD said it wouldn't be a problem, that we didn't have to worry about cooking the starter with the headers, but the problem we had was with the battery cable. We couldn't just run the battery cable up and stick it on the lower lung like you would normally. What we had to do is we had to fish it in behind it, making sure that we didn't hit any sharp edges. It was nice and radius on the block here, so no sharp edges around the top, and make sure we had an end that would allow us to fit down here without grounding out anywhere else on the case. That was a real clearance issue, and it took a lot of time and fidgeting and playing with the multimeter to make sure that our cable wasn't grounded out onto the engine, but we got that sorted out and finished. So something to keep an eye on. If you're going to get a starter, you don't really need a high torque starter unless you're doing a high compression motor. The MSD is very reliable, and as you can see, that header's got to come off to get this starter out. So if something ever happened, it wouldn't be a nice simple crawl up under the car and flip the starter out of it. It would be a little bit more of an ordeal than most guys are willing to deal with. So a good starter up front, definitely a good way to go. But just something to keep in mind if you guys are putting your own together. So just quickly wanted to go over how we went ahead and wired this thing up, just as a temporary setup for you guys. So what we've got, you've got the fuse block here. And that big power cable you saw coming down earlier, it's going to the main battery lung here on the box. So this is what's going to be hooked straight to your battery. What we've got here, these are auxiliaries coming off. So these go straight to this into the battery. We use that for our starter button, just to get us rocking and rolling. We gave you enough starter wire that you shouldn't have to cut or modify anything down here. You should just cut these loose and have plenty of it to go all the way up to your key and ignition. So this is your starter button, and then you've got the other wire, the little one that came with it, that's going to this switch. This is your ignition switch for now. This is what kicks on the computer and gets everybody fired up and going. So simple system of flip the switch, hit the power button, and the motor cranks. Got the gas pedal rigged up, so if you want to bump it and keep the RPMs up, you can definitely do that as well. Something to note, the one-wire alternators do not like running at low RPMs. So don't let it sit there and idle. It won't make enough power to keep the battery charged. It'll eventually get to a low power point, and the alternator will drag the motor down since there's no triggering for it coming out of the computer. Just something else to keep in mind when you're working on it. So for battery cables, your ground cable comes all the way back here. You've got enough room that this could essentially go anywhere in the trunk or over the differential under the package tray. Same thing with the power cable. The power cable goes all the way up to the front to the starter. Plenty of room, but you've got room to run it back anywhere in the trunk area. So last little bit here, we've got this nice big water packed weather sealed plug going to the gas tank. And what you've got, I haven't standardized the colors yet for the Nerd Rod's fuel system. So if you guys are going, you can go ahead and pick up this whole fuel system for your setup as well. But the easy way to identify it is you've got two big cables and two little cables. The big ones, the color is your power to your fuel pump, and the black is the ground to the fuel pump. The small wire, the green in this case, is the signal to your fuel sending unit for the fuel gauge, and the black is a dedicated ground for it. So you'll notice you have the green and the black here with enough cable to run you all the way up to the car. Now, the reason we separated the two ground cables and gave them each their own is to prevent all of the energy that's going to be going through your fuel pump from cheating itself through here and causing flicker signal through your fuel gauge. So dedicated gauge, make sure you don't just tie them together. It'll make issues in the past. You'll see your fuel gauge start to flicker back and forth. So, and I think that about covers it. All right, so real quick, we'll want to let you guys listen to this puppy. So this is a stock LS3 Crate Motor. It's got a stock LS3 cam in it, out of the Corvette. It's got a set of the Melrose coated headers. It's got a full 2.5-inch stainless exhaust all the way to the back, fed through a set of Flowmaster 50 series Deltas. So we'll flip it on, hit the starter button. There you go. Hope you guys liked it. If you have any other questions, feel free to email, call us, or make comments below, and we'll try to get it sorted out. Thanks for watching. You guys have a good one.